After playing through each game back to back, there comes a sense of completion that I find is very rare in story-driven games recently. And where other games allow for the soundtrack and dialogue to carry their weight to make a satisfying ending, leaving Aperture feels like less of a completion of a story and left me a bit uncertain. As it was, each game always had a goal to reach for. In Portal, there was the initial goal to obtain cake at the end of testing, and then to defeat GLaDOS to escape. But when there was an update where you're dragged back in at the end of the game, there leaves questions as to what's going to happen next in Aperture. That keeps continuity and allows for a place of a sequel. Portal 2, though more varying in environments, still had very similar goals: to escape, either through GLaDOS or Wheatley. Either way, the result would be fighting to earn your freedom through any means necessary. Therefore, the last outcome that one would expect after such a long struggle would be a simple release. As GLaDOS calls you an elevator to the surface, after plenty of prior lies, and simply lets you go, there's no real response to give. She's an AI with a simple mindset of testing, and though you bonded a little on your quest to understand Carolyn and the history of Aperture, you're still just an obstacle to her. On the surface, there's nothing but open skies and an endless field, full of unknown opportunity, but with no direction. For the first time, you've got your freedom, but there's no more familiarity. And by leaving you with one more parting gift, you're shut out from Aperture. So the question stands. What was it that made an elaborate prison with a murderous AI a more fond memory than when we started? Where did we go from wanting to escape to wanting to learn more about the place? Well, let's start with what's inherently familiar to us: the setting. Part of what made Portal 2 a gem of a sequel was how much it built off its predecessor, and how much of the story can be deduced through observing your environment. I briefly made note of some of the consistent test chambers, where the first two and last chambers are laid out exactly the same, and even the journey back into the center chamber shows the same layout, because that would reasonably be where you left GLaDOS after the events of Portal. Consistency here does have its limits, and for a game that's roughly 4 times as long as the original, Portal 2 has plenty of room to introduce you to new areas. And they absolutely do. When you first escape testing with Wheatley, you get to see how the facility truly operates, as a conglomeration of tubes, catwalks, and mobile panels that line the test chambers. As soon as GLaDOS initially starts repairs on the facility, you understand that she solely controls and oversees an insane amount of work, which would make sense considering she took over the company. These catwalks are merely remnants of the past. There's no more human employees alive in the facility, and therefore no one to use them. Robots and cores now automate what used to be a bustling facility, and that eerie feeling in the first game where no one was observing you continues as you start to realize how alone you are in this gigantic, desolate place. There are still remnants of the past all around, however hard GLaDOS tries to keep them hidden. More writings from previous people, one basically being a deification of you defeating GLaDOS, the leftovers of a Bring Your Daughter to Work day, and cubbies in the testing chambers that went overlooked. But of course, as you work from behind the scenes to initially stop GLaDOS, the facility looks more or less back on its feet, minus your disruptions. It's really when you fall into the pit that the tone of the environment really takes a turn from Portal's comfort zone. The pit is a wasteland, in every definition of the word. There's mud, trash, broken buildings, and of course, signs of a previous civilization. After being in an environment with a clear goal, the sudden lack of filtered input is almost overwhelming. Down here, the scenery goes for miles in every direction. There's no voice to grab familiarity to, and no real reason to continue, other than curiosity and a hope of escape. You're quite literally at rock bottom, and the game makes sure you know it. Now, while the introduction of Cave Johnson and old Aperture Science still makes me smile as his booming, enthusiastic voice fills the cavern, each subsequent playthrough makes the announcements feel more hollow and out of place. His pre-recorded messages are encouraging, though removed from your actions, and serve more to fill the space left while testing. At this point, you move through the chambers less because there's a goal ahead or someone encouraging you, but almost from a lack of other options. Testing is a familiar pattern, chamber by chamber, implementing new resources and solutions. But it doesn't feel like a solution to being stuck down here. I feel like Valve understood this though. It's in this part of the game where there are more Easter eggs and hidden notes than anywhere else, and that comes from the pacing being more relaxed. When not pushed to a goal or forced onward, you tend to observe your surroundings more, and why shouldn't you? After having only blank white walls to stare at, seeing the lobbies and portraits of Cave change through the years as the story of Aperture unfolds is a fantastic experience, because the more time you take to look, the more you'll be rewarded with the corporation's story. The buildings still look as if they could be functional, they're just absent of people, so you can really picture what aspects of old Aperture was like. Cave Johnson personifies your motivation once you do start making progress in the chambers, where he shows his defiance of safe science in the face of productivity, and before he becomes defeated in his older age, he gives one of the most memorable inspirational speeches ever.
Alright, I've been thinking. When life gives you lemons, don't make lemonade. Make life take the lemons back. Get mad! I don't want your damn lemons! What am I supposed to do with these?
Take the lemons.
Demand to see life's manager. Make life rue the day it thought it could give Cave Johnson lemons. Do you know who I am? I'm the man who's gonna burn your house down with the lemons.
Oh, I like this guy.
I'm gonna get my engineers to invent a combustible lemon that burns your house down.
You might have remembered that you picked up GLaDOS down here. She does pipe in here and there, limited by the power of her potato battery, but her role as a speaking character has changed, due to some character development, we'll get there, and she imposes less on the gameplay than before. She almost acts as an emotional representation of you, responding directly to Cave Johnson's messages and getting more excited as you get closer to the new facility again. The progress of Aperture Science slowly degrading as you continue becomes a direct contrast to your increasing hope of escape. As Cave falls ill and his company starts to go bankrupt, you empathize of course, but more aspects of the storyline starts to click into place. You realize that you've been heading higher and higher with every chamber, every section, until you reach another giant vault door, mirroring your entrance into old Aperture, and you're ready to go through. While the scenery changes to a more familiar area of the facility, and the tempo comes back to a more lively pace, it's less easy to see the place fall into ruin under Wheatley, especially after witnessing the company's earlier story and struggles. As always, the banter between Wheatley and GLaDOS is well timed, showing their characters' development as the power dynamic changes, but what rules the ending sequence is the suspense. You don't have as much control as before in terms of going to meet Wheatley, and his deliberate ignoring of the facility crumbling becomes more and more of an issue, to the point where testing facilities are impaired. But he's so enamored with his control that he lacks the diligence to attend to the responsibilities attached. Kind of like how he didn't check up on the thousands of humans he was in charge of. It's only when he's given the ultimatum of a nuclear meltdown timer that he even acknowledges that he should fix something. Even then, he prioritizes killing you and showing off his power beforehand, and that changes the goal of the final battle. You still want to defeat him, yeah, but not because you need to escape, but for the fact that he let the issue grow to the point where someone else needs to step in and fix everything. This time, there's no big final explosion, and that's a good thing. The final portal closes, and you can rest with the knowledge of success. The biggest achievement in how the environment plays a part in the story comes from how each previous interaction leads to a conclusion in the finale. Testing with GLaDOS taught about the new, complicated facility, which you learn later has to be managed in order to stay functional. The slow, building story behind an abandoned facility, buried deep below, becomes the motivation to preserve what's left of it above, saving it from total destruction. The dialogue and characters carry this story, in contrast to the first Portal, where the facility was the star. But the environment in Portal 2 is a canvas upon which the story is connected and brought into context. In its own way, the setting is a character itself. Mute like you, maybe so, but filling in where words fall short. I've obviously been avoiding spoiling the background of Aperture Science, and that's because I believe it needs its own small section here. It's not often that a video game takes this much care into providing a completely optional narrative for its setting, and here it's done well enough to warrant attention. As he is half of the reason why this is getting its own section, I'll also cover Cave Johnson with his company. He is more of a narrative device than a character anyways, and his presence provides the more personal history of Aperture, where news clippings would fall short. However, I'm gonna stray from looking too much into the wiki entries and reading verbatims because I care more about how the game portrays the company, rather than all of the details and lore. So let's start at the lowest level. This Aperture Science, where they still had money and a bright future. Cave Johnson, by the way voiced by J.K. Simmons if you couldn't tell, was initially a massively successful curtain manufacturer, who made his billions through contracts and connections throughout the military. From those connections, he made the science company that you'd expect a businessman to create, the first iteration of Aperture Science. Collecting scientists from his higher connections and test subjects from renowned athletes, he created plenty of dangerous and possibly lethal tests in order to understand the human body and its environment. From injections of mantis DNA to wildly unstable gels, his many failures led to an increasing economic decline. While his company did make the predecessor to the portal gun, it wasn't published or released, it seems, and they fell into the second iteration of Aperture. It was near here, at some point in the 70s, that monetary issues rose and their main rival, Black Mesa, a rival laboratory, became increasingly hindering to scientific progress. From the voice recordings, you can clearly hear that the quality of test subjects has dropped, most likely from the experiment's mortality rate, and they're now taking anyone they can get, mostly homeless people. This kept costs for subjects low, and probably less backlash for inadvertently killing people, but that didn't end up helping the company from turning a profit. It's here where Cave loses a bit of his defiant attitude, and begins to show a combination of resentment towards others and some disgust to where his company fell to. With Black Mesa buying more and more of their patents, and bankruptcy looming, there was nowhere for Aperture to go but up, and so they sank further. Doubling down on portals, Cave bought Moonrock and ground it into the conversion gel, which, while being great for conducting portals, was lethal enough to poison himself, leading to his final days. As the company falls under, his mind turns to death, and he ponders the idea of digital brain mapping. Understanding that he might not live to see it, but wanting to put his company in the hands of someone he trusts, he tells his scientists to put Carolyn, his secretary and closest ally, into his computer should he die before the process is possible, leading to what eventually becomes GLaDOS. While the morals of Aperture Science were questionable at best in the name of progress, and that's a tradition that's very well continued, that doesn't make its downfall any less depressing. Maybe it's because early Cave Johnson was so charismatic and hopeful that it skewed my perspective, but the reality of running a laboratory like a businessman did catch up to him and left a less than pleasant ending. Though I wish more of the story was accessible in-game, I'm glad that the details were left as relatively optional. No one wants to be forced into reading tons of material or given cutscenes with exposition, and that applies here as well. It would take away from the pacing of isolation at this point in the game, and it rewards the emphasis of exploration in this area, to the point where you only learn more if you actively seek it. Where the story does take relevance is when it grounds and personifies GLaDOS into Carolyn, aiding in her character's development and providing direction in her lowest point. So let's talk about that. And since Wheatley has some similarities in both situation and progression, I'll be contrasting them as we go. Don't get confused though. The star is absolutely GLaDOS, and that will become apparent with the amount of attention she gets in every section of the game. Since we met her first, let's review GLaDOS, the cold, heartless core of new Aperture Science that came from a lovable, enthusiastic secretary. Maybe heartless is too strong of a term though, as it is clear that she enjoys testing. I'd call it a disconnect from human emotion and priorities. To her, humans are inefficient, fallible test subjects whose mind and personalities can jeopardize testing. It was very apparent in Portal that she tolerated us in order to achieve test results, and was using cake as a loose understanding that humans are motivated by rewards. That doesn't make her any less of an ass for berating and lying to us, but we also don't know how many test subjects she endured before us. Having both test subjects and scientists to analyze results with human error could easily irk a perfectionist AI, leading to possibly an eradication of said humans, especially when they want to limit and control her. In this sense, both her and Wheatley share a mutual disgust towards humans. Wheatley has spent more time around multitudes of stored subjects, most likely explaining his more casual speaking tone, but he still shows his true colors when he spends time alone with you. They both give you shit for being an orphan and for being fat, which I guess is relative to a 2-ton Joy-Con, but they both unfortunately have to work with you in order to achieve the goal of running the facility. The largest difference between them is most obviously intelligence. No shit. I mean, yeah, Carolyn was a personal assistant of the CEO of a bustling laboratory for years, filled with knowledge from testing, while Wheatley was quite literally designed to make her dumber. Of course there's a gap in intelligence. What I mean is how that affects their interactions with major events and how they progress as characters. Wheatley has a tendency to be extremely reactive when it comes to stimulus, and that coincides with his lack of forethought. We see an extreme amount of enthusiasm when heading out to destroy the turret and neurotoxin production, and then a lack of preparation on arrival. Both situations require your interaction in order to make the plans come into fruition, and he doesn't develop his abilities to think ahead as the game continues. Unfortunately, he takes digs with his intelligence extremely personal, and that often leaves room for desperate attempts to prove his intelligence. Of course, we see examples of this when he gains knowledge from inheriting GLaDOS' body, but he's so desperate to prove that he's not a moron that any development he does make turns into overconfidence. During the final battle, he's made some fantastic preparations in watching how you killed GLaDOS, all of which are smart moves. No portal services, starting neurotoxin immediately, and bombing the stalemate button. But his lack of foresight leaks back in when you direct bombs towards him, avoiding his shields, and he rearranges them according to your last attack, without a thought towards where you might hit next. Wheatley's a very good example of what could happen when someone who has come from a position of less power or status, who then lets any personal development corrupt them. His major fault comes from a desire for instant gratification, rather than growth and development, ready to take the shortest path for any payoff. A great example of this is how easily he was ready to not leave Aperture after defeating GLaDOS because of how good and powerful he felt in her body. He abandons his initial plan that would have had lasting benefit, and even betrays you in the name of keeping his position, despite your critical role in helping him there. Let's hold that for a second as we compare him to GLaDOS. I'd argue they have some very similar experiences, but the change in how they handle them reflects their priorities. While she certainly has her moments of reaction and surprise, GLaDOS has a tendency to deal with stimulus and new information extremely calmly. I'd say her previous science experiments as a human aided in her ability to adapt, but it goes beyond simply achieving her goals. She's meticulous in every move she makes, and she has to be in order to maintain an entire facility. It's almost as if the knowledge that something has to be done is enough motivation to continue to find a solution. That's a lot of claims. Let me back it up. Taking down Wheatley was an enormous looming task that was becoming more of a necessity as the game progressed. He's extremely unpredictable for someone as logical as GLaDOS, and so she had to be fluid and evolve. Her original plan of frying him with a paradox would be the logical solution to taking down most any AI, but it backfired due to his vast intellect and quick thinking. Therefore, a more head-on approach would be required, and she used knowledge of the corrupt cores to aid in defeating him. Not surprisingly, that idea would come from her own death, which Wheatley studied. But rather than destroying them, the reverse act of attaching them to him and initiating a core transfer would be out of the scope of his prediction, and would be easier than taking on someone with the entire facility at his disposal. What makes the two of them so similar is how they initially acted once gaining control of the facility. Coming from Carolyn, a mere secretary shadowed by her own boss and achievements, she gained plenty of her own overconfidence in her supremacy over humans. This behavior is rampant throughout Portal, where scenarios like escaping the incinerator and beating her in a fight were inconceivable until they happened, and she had no real backup plans. In this light, I can't judge Wheatley too harshly, because his reaction was very similar when presenting another death trap and final battle. His presence quite literally mirrors GLaDOS' past, and what she very easily could have returned to. That's why I believe GLaDOS to be the main character of the sequel to Portal, because her journey of character growth shows such progression and attention to development that it's impossible to not recognize its intentions. At the start of Portal 2, she is still inflicted by her flaws of the prequel, allowing for you to escape the testing chambers and surprise her on your first encounter. She's still such a cold, backhanded bitch in the beginning that my dad rage quit before reaching Chapter 3. It's only when humbled and reminded of her own roots that she develops. Spending time as a potato and listening to the recordings of her past life gives her plenty of time to think while in Old Aperture. And while she doesn't lose her identity, there are some notable changes in demeanor. The first one that struck me was the very first time she compliments you, even in a dismissive tone.
Doing a great job.
Even if her life depended on it, old GLaDOS would absolutely never praise you. There's no scientific benefit. Her conversation also gradually becomes more relaxed and human. Back in the testing chambers with Wheatley, she even pranks him, knowing that it quite literally offers nothing but personal satisfaction. Beyond the fact that she nearly has a mental breakdown as you prepare to enter Wheatley's lair, GLaDOS's behavior in the second half of the game is very clearly influenced by her memories of being Carolyn. Her dialogue includes more humor, emotion, and her tone naturally changes as a human's might. It's an extremely refreshing sight to see her perspective change to her surrounding environment, rather than perceive it as below her or under her control. But of course, human characteristics don't help in running a super efficient facility, and she deletes Carolyn from her database. More than anything else I've said, when the chips were down and you needed saving, GLaDOS had the choice to simply close the portal, stranding both you and Wheatley, and solving all of her problems. It was quite literally the most effective and easy solution. And yet, she still saved you. She brought you in. She waited until you woke up and sent you on your way, honoring her promise. What more could you ask to prove she's grown? Look, I love this game. I know I'm biased. And what sets it apart from other mute protagonist narratives comes from the genius collaboration and storytelling. None other I've played had this level of cohesion between environment, exposition, and supporting cast, all for a non-player character. And I didn't forget about the brain-dead blue ball in space. Wheatley gets a lot more shit because we got to witness his lowest point, but part of me still can't hate him. With time, I think we still could have been friends.
I wish I could take it all back. I honestly do. I honestly do wish I could take it all back. And not just because I'm stranded in space.
I'm in space.
I know you are, mate. Yeah, we're both in space. Anyway, if I was ever to see her again, do you know what I'd say?
I'm in space.
I'd say, I'm sorry. Sincerely. I am sorry I was bossy and monstrous. And I am genuinely sorry.
I'm in space.
The end.